All right, Dominic, thank you. And I want to bring in the pastor right now. Pastor, when you heard those stories from those two plaintiffs, I'm sure you've heard countless other stories from other young men. I remember there's one story, also an interview Dominic conducted. A kid going to graduate school had been stopped 3 times from just the subway where he gets off to walk to his house, which was all, I think, 2 or 3 blocks away. And he described and how his perception of law enforcement had changed so much before the first encounter and then finally till after the last and the third encounter. You run into this a lot?
Well, we run into it. The sad commentary is a daily occurrence. When you have young African American men constantly being challenged, constantly being stopped because of ethnicity, because also the way they dress, we run into this all the time. And the sad commentary in this, it brings a divide between the police and also the community. The community no longer can trust. Why should we now trust the police? Because we are unfairly being targeted. We are unfairly being victimized, unfairly being judged just based on what, color of skin? Because I got a hood on. Trayvon Martin, perfect example of that. Because of what? Wearing a hood, being in a certain community, dressed a certain way, and all of a sudden what? Now you become the victim? Something is wrong in that. And the judge ruling, though we applaud the ruling, and I'm quite sure there will be other people that may think different in the African American community, but we applaud the ruling. However, it's not enough. Just to say now we're going to put a monitor to look over it and we just say, you know, okay, we're grateful. No, this needs to be an end. Racial profiling is an injustice to the community, and therefore it needs to be put to an end, and not just to say, all right, we're going to put certain things in place in order to mitigate or to lessen the severity within community. One of the things I like what Christy Quinn mentioned, and she used this at the height of the profile, over 700,000 people were stopped unjustly. And the thing that Mr. Mayo also mentioned as well, the large percentage of them was found without cause. When you have those staggering type of numbers, what does it say to the community? That if anyone walks?
Well, the idea is the whole debate of guilty to proven innocent. Yeah, but Mayor, it's funny, we'll talk about politics in this in a second, because Christine Quinn's a perfect example of somebody whose position is changed on this just during the campaign, forget about over years. But what I never got was, can you be half pregnant with this thing? Because so many of the candidates have said, we don't want to get rid of the policy altogether, we want to change it. We're going to have a monitor oversee it. Can you have a policy where you give discretion to a law enforcement officer to decide who is or is not suspicious, and it still work?
No, you really can't. What has to happen here is that if someone is suspicious, then you ought to be able to articulate what makes that person suspicious. It can't be because you wear something in particular. It can't be based on your gender or your color. It has to be that you're doing something wrong. And the mayor suggests and the commissioners suggest that these people fit the description of suspects. There are not 600,000 crimes where there were suspects in the first place. So there is no suspect for you to fit the description of. So you're simply walking down the street. The police are not responding to a crime. There's been no 911 call. The gentleman before was in the deli. He's on his way back to teach the kids. No one said anything had happened in that vicinity. They're just stopping him randomly. Things like that happen in other countries, and when they do, the United States abhors it, and we criticize those countries and say, how can you treat your people that way? So essentially, going back to what the Reverend said, you're creating different classes of people in the country, but you're also taking people who could actually be the best asset for police, who live in a community.
And then you hear stuff like stop snitching and all this, where you're not cooperating with the cops. But Dominic, you've heard this when you've covered the story, that there are a lot of these communities where they go in, where the community says, I may not be crazy about this, but I feel safer now with the police presence that they have with this policy than I did before. From the areas with the biggest amount of crime density and stuff, How do you think they view stop and frisk? Do they say they don't like it, but it's a useful tool, it works? Do they want it to go away completely?
You know, that's a great question, and to answer it, you know, the people I talk to, no one likes to be stopped and thrown up on the wall. You certainly don't want your son, your nephew, your grandson thrown up on the wall when he could be an honor student, and now his perception changes for the rest of his life and how he views police officers. So that's one aspect, and then as you said, there's the other aspect. The women in the community, the men in the community, they don't want the crime. There has to be a way where you can do the job, and many of us believe it's going back to the days of community policing, where everyone knew the officers on the beat, Richard, and you could refer to them by name, and you knew that you could talk to them privately or whatever, and the information stayed with the police officer. But this is not the way, because as counselor just said, and as the subject said, what's happening now, Richard, you have police officers that are just stopping young urban kids, we know what that term means, African American, Latino, and they're looking to justify their numbers. It doesn't matter. They're not looking. They're looking for guns, but they're just looking at any subject, meaning any black male. If he takes that suit off, Reverend or myself, that black male could be one of us.
Well, you know, Andrew, to me, the one thing about this thing has been, since we've been covering it, let's be honest, we're not going to have a talk with a kid, with our kids, right, about how you're supposed to sit when the cops pull over. I know all three of these guys have had the conversation with their own children, etc. And I was talking to somebody saying, do you imagine if some cop put his hands on our kid and threw him up on the wall for going home from school to the house? We'd be in that precinct house with two attorneys, and that's why there's a divide. As much as I can understand this and stuff, I can't really get it because I haven't lived it, and hopefully we're not going to live it. But it's that where I don't ascribe bad motives to the police commissioner or to the mayor, but when you hear them and they just keep talking, and they're like, listen, just trust him, he knows best.
Right.
That's where it gets a little scary.
And you know, we've had this debate so many times on this show, and I always seem to come back to the same point, but it's just, if it were white people in neighborhoods where there were concentrated stop and frisks, if this policy was in place and 90% of the stops were of white people, there's no chance that this policy would stand. No matter what community you're talking about, whether it's New York City or an urban community or a rural community or a suburban community, there's no chance it would stand. And that's why this debate always seems so frustrating to me. It just
Yep.
We're trying to get people to experience what they might otherwise not see in front of them every day. But how do you get past that one glaring fact?
I always had a question, and I never got a clear answer because, for obvious reasons, we've had cops in the show who secretly recorded some of the precinct house conversations. Do you think the PBA privately, they'd rather this thing go away because they're just carrying out the policy and the quotas they don't like, et cetera? Or do they say, no, we need this to effectively police? You were in law enforcement.
I'd be surprised if the PBA in its heart believes they need this. I think at the end of the day, the best thing for PBA, and again, to go back to what the mayor said, about stop and frisk and losing the presence of the police, they're two different things. You can have police present in a location, and that presence alone is going to diminish crime in that location, but it doesn't mean that they're stopping and frisking people. In White Plains, we represented two gentlemen who were working at the housing authority. One worked at the housing authority in White Plains, the other lived in the housing authority, in an apartment there. They both got arrested simply for going from apartment A to apartment B to visit a friend. We got a letter from the housing authority saying that they didn't intend for these people to be arrested and they were legally there. So simply imagine going home tonight and getting arrested, or going from your house to your neighbor's house and getting arrested and being asked what you're doing there, and the neighbor's not home, so you just get taken in to custody. And everyone else is looking out and saying, well, gee, I wonder what you did. Or when you leave the studio today, getting arrested right outside on the premises of RNN. I mean, those are the types of things we have to think about, because unless we can go into that type of an analysis, as you said before, it's very difficult to understand what it really means. But when you wake up in the morning knowing that you can be arrested going to work or going to visit a friend or family member, and hoping and praying that that friend or family member is home because the police may not believe you were there, That's the problem.
And of course, no probable cause.
No probable cause. At the trial, in fact, when we asked the officers, why did you stop them? They couldn't give us a reason. There was no reason. In fact, when we asked, why, what do you need in order to arrest a person? The officer said a badge and a gun. I said, no. I mean, you have to need something more than that. He says, oh, a probable cause or a warrant, and a warrant's based on probable cause.
But also, too, I just want to bring up, you mentioned even within White Plains, Western, and Christopher Ridley always comes to my mind, in which we strongly stood against the ruling on that. But again, a police officer doing his job gets killed because he fit a certain profile. He didn't get the benefit of the doubt. And for us in our community, and this is really what it comes to, it's not just even stopping. Also, people will die in this process and have died just because of the profile. This thing, it goes beyond just numbers, just beyond harassment, but people actually have died.
Obviously, Trayvon Martin. We
Right.
can talk about that story, and
Right.
part of it is, different forms of justice and perception of
Mayor
reality.
Bloomberg, I know you got to go. Mayor Bloomberg is politically posturing. He knows with this appeal, the case won't even be heard. He'll be out of office and long gone.
Yeah.
Not his problem anymore.
We are going to talk about, when we come back, the politics of this, because like in everything, there's always politics. In November, there's a major election to decide who the next mayor of New York City will be, and as Dominic said, it will not be Mayor Michael Bloomberg unless we get a fourth term here. But anyway, so how will this play out in the race? Trust me, in a major way. We'll talk about that after this.